Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Sameem.
I'm Shingai.
And I'm Will.
All right, we got a full house again this time we're picking up the Secrets of Character by Matt Bird again. And this is our fourth episode covering this. We're still in chapter 2. We left off right before the universal behavior section, which is where we're going to pick up this time. I do have to say before we get started how stoked I am with the Discord's response to this particular book. I think whatever conversations come out of this has been pretty fun. I got a message from, I don't know if it was public or not, but I got a message from someone in Discord asking when we were coming back to this. So it is working, which I love. But I think it's interesting because not all of us are as stoked about the book as others, right? But I think it's the conversations, and this is what we were talking about before. Is that it's not really, it's the conversations that come out of some of this stuff, and that's what I'm really excited to come back to. So, okay, but anyway, it was exciting. So here's what we're gonna do. Just like last time, we talked about. We're in the 4 aspects of believability. We talked about a fully fleshed out life, and we're getting into universal behavior, which is this big chunky section with a bunch of subtitles or subsections. So what I try to do is kind of group things a little bit like last time, but I don't know. It was hard to group certain things up. So you'll kind of see how it goes. But I am going to use some of his examples, but for the most part, I'm going to ask you guys for examples. So that's kind of the way we're going to approach it. Ready?
Ready.
Yes.
Sweet.
Let's do it.
All right. So, in this section, he starts off like this. Characterization is always a tricky combination of the familiar and the unique. Having some familiar behavior makes us say, yes, this resonates with my own life. While unique behavior makes us say, but this hero isn't exactly like me. She's a specific individual. So, he says, let's start with universal behaviors. I am interested to see what you guys think of just this very first one. It says, have them prep for conversations. So once you start looking for these scenes, you'll see them all the time. If they prep for a conversation, then you can either have the conversation go how they hoped, which we now know is gratifying payoff for both them and for us, or things cannot go well, which in a way is ironically upset expectations, both theirs and ours. So my question for you guys is I don't really think about this consciously, but maybe it's something I should be more intentional about, right? So I guess what I'm asking you guys is this something that you guys think about? And is there any examples from your work or someone else where this was a must for character development or plot? That's my first big question.
By this, you mean writing a character that is either different or familiar?
No, by this, I mean the specific universal behavior, which is having them prep for conversations, right? So the example he gives is in Jason, the Born Identity is fished out of the sea with no memory and sails home on a fishing trawler, spending his time in the hold, practicing introducing himself when he arrives. And this bonds us to him and makes his insecurities real to us. Are there moments where, because we get this sometimes where characters are talking to themselves or kind of prepping for something that's upcoming that clues us into something and gives us something about them. What do you think, Sameem?
Well, I'm struggling to think of a specific example, but I feel like it's a very common trope at the start of a movie or the first episode of a TV show. Mm-hmm. And it's so common that I can't pick a specific example, which sounds paradoxical. But I feel like it does a couple of things. It introduces you to the character and their anxieties and things like that. But I think it also builds tension and some mystery about what it is that they're so nervous about and sucks people into that moment. So it can feel like an overused trope, but it's also very effective at the same time. So I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example.
Totally. Jenna?
Yeah, like Sameem, what I have is more vague generalizations that I've seen so many times. I'm thinking about I have this image of a man kind of like walking towards the door to talk to a woman and then walking away from the door and then walking back towards the door and then walking away from the door. And I have no specific context for what it's coming from because I think it's something that I've seen a lot in romances, like straight romance movies of the dude trying to work up the courage to talk to a woman. And then I was also thinking about like pump up talks in mirrors is another
I was thinking of that.
yeah, trope that I think I've seen. But then I was just thinking about like prepping for normal conversations doesn't seem to be a thing that happens much that I've seen in fiction, but it is something that I do a lot. Just kind of prep for normal conversations. And I thought that was more of a neurodivergent tendency than necessarily a universal behavior. So there's something interesting there too.
Oh, for sure. Will?
Thank you so much, Marshall. Well, to go off of Jenna, you do see it in romance, rom-coms a lot, and I can actually give you a book. It's by Kosuko Jackson, and it's called I'm So Not Over You. And you see it with both the main protagonists of Hudson and Keon. There's both scenes, one in the beginning with Keon meeting Hudson, and then another when Hudson brings Keon to his family. You see these insecurities play out. And what makes it interesting to me is the way Kosuko actually does it through dialogue. So like it's Keon talking to his best friend and really kind of going through play by play of like how he's going to be like, totally turning Hudson down and he has no hold over him. And the minute Hudson asks him, he's like melts. And then when Hudson brings Keon to, his family, they're kind of going over like, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? And it's also, what's nice is it shows their insecurities, but like with rom-coms specifically, I think when it goes wrong, it's hilarious. And I think that's, a lot of times people will put romance down. Not us, but like people do. And the thing is about romance is that it can cause so much good tension in a story. And I think when you can do it in a way that shows the insecurities of both characters, and then when things go awry, it makes you want to turn the page. But it also, when it can be funny, it's hard to write something that's funny on the page, and when you can do that, and I think Kosuko Jackson does this so good in his rom-coms, is that there's hilarity that ensues and that pushes the story forward because I think it does a couple things when you can do this. It endears you to the character, but then the aftermath can also make you really love the character a lot.
I mean, I love that. And I think the example that always comes to my head, and I think Jenna said something about the mirror conversations. I find that a lot in sitcoms. In sitcoms, they do this all the time, right? People coming over and they'll practice something or they'll try to figure something out or someone will walk in or something, it's those moments. I think Will said that pretty well. Those are those comedic moments that are actually really they're character moments, but it's also a way to hit that punchline a little bit too. Go ahead, Will.
And I would really challenge anyone who listens to this episode, go into our Discord and see if you can find those moments in books. Because Marshall's right. We definitely see it on comedy, on the stage, like on TV. But I think if you can find it in a book where it's also funny, we can learn so much from that when we are writing, even if we're not writing comedy. I also think of like, a lot of the things, and this is a TV show, but a lot of the things that happened on Buffy were also at times really campy and hilarious, but that's on TV. But when you can find it in a book, I feel like those are the times as writers we need to hone in and see how they're staging it and how it's making us laugh, because that is like that is a really good writer who's doing that, because that is really difficult.
For sure. Shingai?
I was just going to say the part about romance adding the tension really sticks with me, especially because, like, right now I'm working on a story that has an element of romance to it. And I haven't really done that with long fiction, but I realize that the more that I lean into the romance, the more material I have, because I'm just like, there's so many more contradictions to work through. Yeah.
I think if anyone wants to read a really great author who does all of these things is Alyssa Cole. She's a romance and she writes thrillers. And Alyssa, I've said this before on the podcast. I took a class with her where she talks about how important romance is in books that aren't even, romance itself, whether it's speculative, whether it's thriller, that it can give you so much nuance and complexity of the characters, and especially when you're stuck, because almost all of us know what it's like to be nervous in front of someone or be excited about someone, that it can really help move the plot forward when you're in that first draft. And that way, when you go back, it's like you're just sharpening everything else. So,
all right. So the next part I think is going to be a little bit of I don't want to say sticking point, because there's a lot of debate about this. He even says it right here. So the next section, which is why I didn't lump it in with anything, have them interrupt themselves when they talk. So he says, this is a matter of much debate among writers. Should characters speak in complete sentences? The fact is, people rarely do so in real life. But do readers actually want to read realistic dialogue, or do audiences want to hear it? So, should we write this way? He goes on to say, he gives a couple of examples, but he says, as I said, producers and other note givers have said I do it too much. It's realistic, but maybe too much so. He says, if your characters are too articulate, injecting some of the realism into your dialogue will make it come alive and feel refreshingly real, etc. So, Will, you respond to that. Go.
I want Nick to go first.
This is the thing where I think you have to have it, mainly because how else do you get like certain dialects across? The way people talk and things like that, whether they're from a certain region in the South or they're from up north, like people talk different. And I think that's where this is where it's resonating, is people talk different. People are from different parts of the world. Like, you have to have it, otherwise you're reading a technical manual, and that's kind of boring to me. So to me, it brings your character out even more.
Totally agreeing. And also adding that it not only brings out regional or geographic or cultural sorts of aspects of the character, but also individual personality. Like, so much of the ways that people interrupt themselves, the ways they speak in, incomplete sentences is so different, and it can really do a lot to make that character feel like a real person in a way that I think if everybody is speaking in complete sentences all the time, it just it flattens the different the nuances and the personalities of who these people are.
Sure. Shingai?
Exactly that. Like everything that Nick and Jenna have said. And also thinking about neurodivergence. Like, most of my friends speak in incomplete sentences because we're thinking around the thought that we're thinking around, and it just like spirals into another thought and spirals into another thought. So it's like trying to get all the thoughts together in a complete sentence. We understand each other in what is said beneath the things that are said. And now that I think about that, I also think about how that's poetry, right? Like you're thinking about, you're trying to read what a person is saying underneath the words that are coming out of their mouth.
Well, I would like to just call out Nick for one moment, if I could, because that bitch read some of my work and was like, your characters are like constantly like not finishing their sentences, and the way you do. So don't ignore it, Nick. Okay, you do. But what's interesting is the way that I was writing it. Right? So I was writing it where it was just a dash afterwards, because that's what you do in screenplays and for stage, right? And so sometimes it throws people off. I still think you can do that in your writing, but I agree with what everyone says. I also think It is the way that you can get the rhythm of characters. Because when you have your bestie, one of you will start saying something and the other one will just interrupt you and finish the sentence or be like, no, I know exactly what you're going to say. Not today, Satan. So I think it just gives you a little bit more dynamic to the language. That's all I have to say on that.
Were you using the dashes because someone else was talking over them, or they just weren't? I'm confused because the punctuation is important, right? How you put that on the page is important.
For sure. No, like you do it as a dash so that automatically it's being read, that the next person is just going right in.
Totally.
So that
but that's what you were doing,
finish.
and Nick had a hard time with it. That's what I'm
Nick
asking.
had a hard time. Nick was yelling at me about it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take that feedback.
Hold on. Let me explain. It was every dialogue. It was mid-sentence. It was 2 or 3 in a sentence.
No.
It was so much so that it threw me off where I was like, what is going on? Like,
but this is what Matt Bird is saying. He's saying he does it too much too.
I'm fine with the dashing there. It makes sense. But every conversation, every other line of the same character, like it just looks different. It looks weird.
He had a hard time with it. Yes.
That's fair.
Oh,
That's
for
fair.
Sure.
Sameem?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe somewhat related to that. I don't think there's a doing it too much, but I do think it is worth thinking about how does it come across on the page, and is it where you were trying to draw emphasis in that scene or in that moment? Is it just a baseline that you want presented? Do you want to use it more during particular situations to like exemplify something? So I think that like at the baseline, it's like this. If this is how people talk, this is how people talk. But then it's also like we all talk in different ways in different contexts. And so sometimes you use that on the page as well.
Well, I would add that too. Like it depends on how you're consuming the book as well. Like audiobook is going to read differently than a whole bunch of dashes on a page, right? How your brain sees it and your ears hear it are going to be a little bit different. I feel like how things are even laid on the page sometimes can turn some readers off. And I'm thinking that could be what maybe Nick was dealing with too a little bit. What were you saying, Will?
No, Shingai, you can go. You had your hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that point for you talk differently in different contexts made me think about code switching.
Yeah.
And how if you were writing this into a story, you could also use it very intentionally and have your characters talk in incomplete sentences when they're code switching, depending on where they feel more comfortable and where they don't feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And just to follow up too is, and this isn't a dig, so I don't want it to come across this way. I also think you also need to read more widely. Right? Like I think a lot of times when people are seeing unusual ways about how they're seeing the sentence structure, I think you need to read more widely, because you will start seeing it the more that you read widely, and look at like the way different authors from different backgrounds write, or if someone is coming from a stage and then writing a book, you're going to see these little nuances. And I think also to Marshall's point, when you are reading something that says, interrupts a lot, I think it is really important that you actually listen to the audio, because it is going to change the flow of the way that it's going to be acted out for audio. And that's a really good reminder, because then you can start training your brain about, oh, now I see what they're doing. Because for stage, when I have that dash, the actor's just going right in and talking over. And that's what I mean about read widely and also watch widely. Pay attention to what you're watching and see how that happens, because that's also that's like another fun way that you can do to train your brain.
And when I'm back into the series now, I put it down. And I don't know why I put it down, probably because the TV show was so compelling, but I'm reading the Expanse series right now for some reason. I don't know. I picked up the first book again, and then I was like, oh man, because I think after watching the whole series, but there's something that James S.A. Corey does pretty well, and maybe it's the audiobook, maybe it's how it's written, or a combination of both, but you know who's talking. And that's something else that will come up later. Like, sure, it's the voice actor putting that slight southern drawl on the pilot's voice. Sure. But at the same time, it's the word choice. It's the words used. It's the actual language as when it comes to the belters, right? You know when a belter's talking in that series because it's something you've never heard before, you know, and there's something really compelling about being able to do that on the page really effectively. Will?
No, that is James S.A. Corey. It is the writing. And the actors just enhance that because I don't know if anyone else has read those books, and it's also the way that they both wrote them. Because one was writing a certain character arcs in it, and then the other would write one of the others. And then they would switch and they would make sure that they got the rhythm of each of the characters right. That's why it comes across so well. And then just with the actors, of course it is, but it is truly in that writing. And I agree with Nick. C.L. Clark and Tracy Deonn do it really well too.
Let me add another layer to this really quick because we're not quite done with language. There's two things that are kind of tacked on here. And he gives a couple of examples, but he says, have them use language or do things we only know from real life. And he also says, don't let them say what they wouldn't say. So I'm curious how that sits with you guys. I'm going to talk about one example because I love the book and I'm just finishing up teaching it again. And this has to do with don't let them say what they wouldn't say. And we're talking about characters. So he brings up Nick in The Great Gatsby. Like a lot of Ivy League graduates, avoids saying the name of his school, supposedly out of humility, but it always just calls attention to it. I graduated from New Haven in 1915. I don't know if you guys have read that anytime recently, but I have to explain to my students that, oh no, he's talking about Yale. He's just not saying it. You know what I mean? And I find this fascinating when it comes to character development a little bit. And the example he uses for how them use language or do things we only know from real life is from Community. He says in the first scene of the pilot of Community, the dean loses one of the index cards he's reading from, accidentally turning his rah-rah speech into a harsh put-down. When he realizes this, he gets embarrassed and asks everyone to help him look for the missing card. I love that scene, by the way. Can we all look around for our immediate areas? But that's the example. What do you think of these two other elements on top of what we were just talking about? Go ahead, Sameem.
I'm not sure if this is what he's getting at, but I hear that as don't use your character dialogue for like exposition and like plot reveal. If it doesn't feel like the natural thing to happen, like don't it should be what the character would actually say and not just a device for you to move the story forward. Because you can always tell.
Yeah, it's kind of obvious sometimes. Will?
Well, I think let's go back to romance for this because, but I'm going to use Six of Crows from my queen, Leigh Bardugo. When Kaz is trying to talk to Inej, who's my favorite character, and I swear that she is me. He wants to say, I love you. I care for you. You're important to me. He doesn't. He talks about the job and that the job is valuable. So Inej is. And I think so this is interesting because you know what the character wants to say, right? Because she's kind of describing his like inner thoughts, but also the way his body's reacting. But he says the very Kaz thing. And this is very realistic. You know, she's not going to go the opposite way for multiple reasons. She's not going to Kaz isn't going to tell Inej he loves her because it wasn't the right moment in the book because they need to build tension. But also by Kaz saying what he said is just so him and so like that character of like keeping things so closed off that it then raises the tension and you just also want to punch him in the face repeatedly. But yeah, that's how I took it.
Well, and that brings us kind of back. We kind of touched on this in the last episode along the same lines of basically saying like, you want the reader to be like, oh, that's so Kaz. or that so this character. You know what I mean? And I feel like going back to my example with the Expanse series, that I'm reading it again, it's like, or finishing the series, it's like everything every character does is so that character. Like it blows my mind how well they pulled this off. And it's no wonder that thing turned into a kick-ass TV series as well. Jenna?
I didn't mean to interrupt. If you wanted to keep talking about The Expanse, it was just
I'm good. I'll do that all day. You're good.
Continuing point. Because I was thinking about the way then that some characters not saying things can also be accented by characters who over say things as well, as a means of like highlighting those characterizations. Again, thinking about neurodivergent folks, and myself included, who tend to just spout every little interesting fact or thing that I am thinking about without much of a filter, and how that can be a great way of then accenting the character who doesn't say things with the one who's going to spout them out anyway. As anyway, that's what I was thinking about.
There's one more thing that has to do with dialogue a little bit, and I'm going to throw this out there. The next part, it says, write non-written dialogue. So one of the dreaded notes that a dialogue writer can get is, this feels written. We speak differently from how we compose on the page, and writers should keep that in mind when writing dialogue. How is off-the-cuff dialogue different from an essay that somebody would compose? I like this example here. In the pilot The Good Place, which I love, Eleanor wakes up to find herself in a cheery waiting room, then brought into an office for a meeting. The man inside makes polite conversation with her for a while, but she gets confused and says, "Oh, one question. Where am I? Who are you? And what's going on?" I love this example, and I'm gonna let Shingai go ahead. I don't want you to lose.
Say the thing.
No, you're fine. You're 100% fine.
I was gonna say that I really love The Good Place. Such a great show. So I'm a fan of that example. But I also don't know if I'm fully sold on this idea. I am thinking about when I started writing, the way my people spoke, whatever that means, because that also isn't a representation of like all of Kenya. How the dialogue was different from what my readers were expecting. And yeah, that critique sounded similar to what he's saying in the book right now. So I'm struggling with it.
Yeah, totally. Will?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think you have to know of maybe where the author is coming from or where the character is coming from. Because I'll give you a simple... Okay, I don't want to use her as an example. Okay, I'm going to use... I was going to say she should not be named.
Oh, I'm going to skip that example later too, don't worry. Yes.
I'm going to use Laurel K. Hamilton, which writes Anita Blake, which that's like what I grew up reading as a child, right? Like when I was like roughing it. She has this character. He's a vampire and he's French, but the way that he speaks English, especially when he's interacting with Anita, the main protagonist, is really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people picked up on it right away because he's very formal, but when he speaks in French, it's very informal, very loving, right? Even when he's supposed to be viewed as an undead jerk. And I picked that right up on that right away because of speaking Spanish, right? My mother speaks very proper English and in like these full dynamic sentences. But in Spanish, it is just this smooth, sometimes nurturing, sometimes manipulative, sometimes evil, just depends on the mood. But there's a different way that she goes about things. And I think that comment about not speaking in full sentences almost could be localized to like the US, maybe Canada. Do you know what I mean? Because every culture's a little bit different. And like my mom coming over, she speaks very proper English, But when she speaks the native tongue, it's just like more fluid and quick and dynamic. Sure. I think.
Let's go, Jenna, then Shingai.
Yeah, I was wondering when we were going to trip into like why calling this section universal behavior is maybe a very brazen, arrogant white dude thing to do. Is the dude white who wrote this? I don't know. I'm making assumptions, but I think that there's few people who would go ahead and claim the things that I'm about to lay out for you are universal human experiences, and this is how you write about them. And some of these are like, I don't know, practicing conversations might be something that people do, but I think there's something about calling them all universal behavior. Like we didn't have to make that broad of a claim about these. You could say these are common experiences that are cool to write about. And so I think part of the problem ends up kind of like Shingai was pointing out, reifying the ways that people will end up critiquing writers of color, or giving them, I guess, more tools to do that by saying, well, I read this book and these are universal, behaviors. So this is not the right way to represent your people. There's something about calling it that and then writing about it in that way that I wonder if it would be better to articulate these differently, leave them a little bit more open in their formulation. Also, I have not read the book. I didn't do the homework, so I'm talking out my ass here. You can all tell me I'm wrong.
No, I think this is the problem that I think LP was having a little bit too with some of this stuff. He butts up against it because he's making a lot of like generalizations, trying to help us develop character, but really oversimplifying things at times too, which can be a little problematic. Shingai, then Will.
That's exactly it. Because I found the thought that I was trying to say, which is when the way your people speak is so far away from what is considered universal, then it makes you feel deeply seen to be able to read the way your people speak,
I also want to say too is that everything that Jenna said about putting it under universal, because it took me a little bit to pick this up when I would go to Paris, because I go to Paris a lot for Fashion Week, right? And even watching in certain circles of people who had old money and who are deeply wealthy and how they speak, and the way that you can tell by these little inflections in the voice and their body language of when people don't speak in proper or like these full sentences, of how they look down on that. So I think, again, that universal of like, everyone has like a short version, or not everyone talks that way. Well, again, like it all depends on like the situation that you're in, because I know some of my friends who came from a very affluent family speak in a different type of pattern, and a lot of it is intentional so that they feel higher than the common people.
Sameem, go ahead, then I'm going to add something to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a few months since I read it, and I did it as audio, so I can't go back and reference it as quickly. I do think that if I remember right, I remember getting irritated at some of these sections. I do think he adds some nuance to his credit. But I think that, and this is a bit of a tangent, I think the general, I guess my general take on the book was there's a lot of useful things, but it felt like it was more telling you how to sell something, telling you how to write something that will sell. And he's not wrong about a lot of that stuff, but I think you have to interrogate, to the point of this conversation, is that what you want to write? And as long as you can draw that distinction, it's fine. It's fine to learn from the things that will sell and decide how you want to use them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that you say that, considering, I mean, he's like, well, and he's giving us examples that are really well known as well, that have sold really well, that are really popular. So how do you reach the most people? Maybe these things will work. Well,
Okay, so, and then we can go on because I feel like this can be a whole tangent. This is the problem I feel with American society when it comes to art and capitalism. In Hollywood, they want to just remake, reproduce, recycle, right? And yes, I think it's important to learn those things that are most common and that's sold. But when it honestly comes to art, there is a point where you can take some of that advice and then you have to develop who and what you want to be as an artist, because that could be the next big thing and that could change everything. I hope when people listen to us or when they read the book that don't be beholden and put yourself in a box. Listen to it, take it in, but please do something that is you. That is the point of your art. Because if you just keep reproducing, our art's never going to break new boundaries. One of my professors had me go see this artist named Derek Adams. And right now he's huge right now because he is taking modern art in a really different way. I mean, Beyonce's bought his stuff. He's been like all over. He's very much the opposite of Kehinde Wiley, right? Where Kehinde Wiley, if anyone doesn't know him, what he did is he took traditional poses from artists in the 17th and 18th century and put Black men and women, common Black and women, in designs of today with the background of these regards. So he like recontextualized it, but it was very realistic. Where Derek Adams, what he's done is he fuses all these different versions of art and he has something really unique. And when he started out, he knew all the rules, right? He was a really great, could look at a painting and paint exactly what's that. But then he was like, we need to break away from that. We need to start creating something of ourselves. And now with him doing it for the past 20 years, he's like exploding. And it's also, you see these younger artists being able to take chances. And that's what we need. We need people who are going to follow their own voice and path. So you go and you create something different. And that becomes popular.
Yeah, totally. Jenna, please.
Oh,
she gone.
Push the wrong button. Should I say these thoughts out loud?
Sure.
Sorry, these were.
I love thoughts out loud. This is perfect. Go.
Thoughts out loud. I guess I can put on my pop culture professor hat because I was also thinking, well, as you were talking about that repetition, how that's been around for so long in U.S. popular culture, and it was something that Horkheimer and Adorno, critical theorists, critiqued in like an essay in 1940, 1941, 1943, somewhere around there. But after they were German Jewish professors who, after escaping to the U.S., then were horrified by the way they saw people receiving popular culture here and thought that it resonated a lot with the way that propaganda had been used in Germany pre-World War II. So there's an essay called, I think, The Culture Industry, that talks about the way that repetition, not only is it harmful in like not allowing artists to be creating things that are new and interesting and reflect, who they are in their worldviews and their cultures, but also they would say that it's a means of preparing people for fascism, because what that repetition does is it gets you in a space where you aren't expected to think. You're expected to just take things in. You just take in the media without having to think about it, because it just repeats the tropes, the things, the plot lines, the forms that you expect. And then they're saying that that's a form of propaganda, in that it prepares you to act that way in the rest of your life, to just take things in rather than imagining different ways of doing things or imagining different possibilities. So, and here we are today.
Yeah, and here we are today. Will and Sameem, you reacted to that. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Sameem. You go first.
I was just going to add that it also, I feel like, sets what normal is and what the baseline is, and makes it really easy for then anything that's different to be like, well, that's not art because it's not this thing that I've seen. And you're trying to change it. You're trying to change our culture. And now we have to repress you for these reasons. That might sound familiar. I'm not sure.
Indeed.
Nothing there in connection to fascism or our current, spot either.
Climate, yeah.
This also reminds me of, and this is all incorporative of like critiquing writing or critiquing someone's writing. Has anyone ever seen Yoko Ono's Cut piece? Okay, we're going to put a link of it in there. Afterwards, I want everyone to watch it. Yoko Ono is a brilliant artist. I think so many times she gets overshadowed because of like everyone thinks she broke up the Beatles, but she is an amazing artist. She sat in this middle of the room. She had fully clothed, but they were already cut, and people would go up and remove them. And she just sat there for a minute. And it is such an idea. There's so many layers to this piece of art. Watch it, because it is not just about how people said it wasn't art. She wasn't an artist. But then you watch the audacity of the way people take it off of her. It reminds me a lot of like sexism, fascism, everything that we're talking here, that people will have like this, almost like this group mentality because they're not thinking. They're not thinking about what it does to women, what we take from women of color, what we take just from people, the way that other women reacted to her. So it just reminds me of this thing of like, you have to create art and just everything that we're talking about. Just watch it, because it's going to interconnect with what we're talking about. It's a very profound piece. And like, we watched it in my art class because we were talking about like art and how do you be original and what is art. And I think everyone in my classroom afterwards got really quiet, and a lot of people were really choked up, and a couple people started crying.
Damn. Because
it makes you think about how we think something is normal in society, and then when we actually take the moment to actually think, because this was the whole point of what she was trying to do, of to think of what you're doing. It's very powerful. Go watch it.
All right. Well, I did put a link. There'll be a link in the show notes, so you can definitely check that out. To switch gears, in the interest of time, I want to dabble in this next one a little bit. Let's go from the universal to the specific. The next section, see what I did there? The next section is a specific personality. So he says, you need to balance their universal behavior, there's that word again, with unique things that only this character would do. This must be an individual. On the other hand, we all had the experience of seeing someone do something we thought only we did and say, oh, good, I'm not the only one. On the other hand, we've all had that dreaded moment of realizing, oh, crap, I'm the only one, aren't I? So he kind of goes on. He goes into this next section. There's a bunch of little subsections, but I want to focus on this first part a little bit. He says they need a specific way of talking. We've kind of dabbled in this, but there's another layer to this I want to add to you guys. So going through your texts he says, go through your texts and you'll hear your friends talking as you read each one, because they all have different voices. This is even more true of fictional characters who should always pop a little more than people in real life. So this reminds me of something I was going to say a little bit earlier when we were talking about specific ways people speak, and kind of going into this, like the communities you're part of are also another layer on top of that too. Like for, in my gaming communities, there's specific lingo and phrases and things that come along with that particular community. Just as an example, right? But one of the things he says is this little subsection, which I actually kind of like this. I'm curious what you guys think. He says, give them a unique metaphor family. Think about this for a second. He says, this is the aspect of your characters' lives that determine which metaphors, curses, and exclamations they use. The source of this is usually their job, their home region, or their psychological state. So let me find the example. Yeah, he uses Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Oh, a very universal thing that everybody knows about, right? He's a kindly old monk, but his metaphor family is militaristic. And he gives all these examples of moments in that first film where it shows that although Luke is seeing this mentor character as this old kind of wise religious figure, he has a different background that he's putting out there through his actions and the things that he says. So for example, he says, this is the one, this one's actually funny, which is why I want to bring it. When he gives Luke an emblem of his religion, he gives him, of all things, a laser sword. And he praises it by pointing out that it has a superior target accuracy to a laser gun. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight, not as clumsy or random as a blaster. Later, his concern with weapon accuracy continues, this is one of my favorite lines. Sand people always ride single file to hide their numbers. And these blast points, too accurate for sand people. Only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise. That's funny because they always miss everything. But he goes on and he has a bunch of other stuff like this. But I'm curious what you guys think of, I lost my question. It's in there somewhere. I'm curious what you guys think of this idea of a metaphor family or some other background that is behind the scenes in your characters or characters you've seen. Do you think about this? How do you implement it? And or where have you seen it done really well? Or is this all bunk and it's too much Star Wars talk? Go ahead, Sameem.
Not too much Star Wars talk. I think it's a really useful device if it makes sense to do it for that character. I think if you have a character who has formulated so much around one specific metaphor, that in and of itself is saying something about the character. But I don't think every character should be like that. Otherwise, that feels like very forced. It's like, and you're putting people into these like cookie cutter sort of situations. So I think I would just be careful about how you use it, and when you use it and why you use it. I think we all think in analogies in some way or another, but whether or not they're so tied to one specific subject matter, I don't think it's true unless you're a very specific type of person coming from a very specific type of context. Yeah, hopefully that made sense.
It does. Jenna?
Yeah, that made a lot of sense to me because I'm also thinking about how a metaphor family or thinking in metaphors makes sense for someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is a, mystical figure, who is someone who is operating a little bit more metaphorically in general, and that a number of characters don't operate that. I don't want to say that deeply, but that metaphorically, that are thinking about their lives through metaphors and analogies in the same way. It makes sense for someone who's really reflective, perhaps, or somebody who is coming up with different sorts of emotional or psychological or spiritual structures in order to process their world. But I think, like Sameem is saying, there's a number of characters that it would feel forced to have them engage, like to follow that through every interaction that they have.
Yeah. Shingai?
I also think that it's a missed opportunity for dialogue and like for someone to come to insight through conversation and connection and community. So there are some ways when we go into someone's individual psyche too much, we lose out on the connections that they have in the real world.
Yeah, and actually how those connections make somebody who they are, right? That there isn't just an individual separate from all the relations that they have.
Well,
so in the book, he's basically saying your character has to have like these metaphors that they use throughout the book or that describe the way they talk or their personality.
I read it sort of as it can be. I think it kind of depends, kind of like what Sameem was saying. I think it kind of depends on the character. But for that particular character, it works. In fact, he has another.
What character did he reference? Obi-Wan, right?
Obi-Wan, yeah.
So, like, that works the way he's using metaphor and the way he's talking about it for Star Wars, you see that throughout, like especially in the one Star Wars book called Ronin and the one Star Wars book I'm currently writing. There's some metaphors in there.
So I'm currently writing.
I am. Yeah, I'm currently writing a Star Wars book.
I heard. You told me.
But I also think when I think of my own metaphors of like sometimes how like I talk, maybe I always think of Tupac. That's my canon.
Okay. I'm going to add one more thing to this that he says in this section before I go to the next part, because I think that might be where we need to end it. But Shingai brought up code switching earlier, and he actually mentions it in this section. He says, this section is pretty short, but this is what he says after he's done with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He says, it's also telling when a character shifts their metaphor family based on the situation. The heroes of both Get Out and Blackish are shuttling between all white and all black worlds, and they talk differently in each. Though it annoys them that they have to do so, they're code switching. Dr. Dre in Blackish pilot has to put up with white coworkers at his advertising firm asking him, how would a black guy say good morning? With exasperation, he answers, just like that. But later, he acts equally exasperated when his family is speaking in a deracialized way at home. So I think this is interesting for what Shingai was saying earlier too. As something to think about with our characters. One of the books I'm teaching right now with my students is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I don't know if anybody has read that by Sherman Alexie. But it's, in a nutshell, a young teenager leaves the reservation and goes to an all-white school. And so he feels like he's part-time in one place and part-time in another. And that runs through the entire book. So there's code switching throughout, but he also doesn't quite, he's frustrated that he has to do it and he doesn't feel accepted in either place, right? I don't know. Any other thoughts on the metaphoric family?
I mean, we could do a whole show about code switching because I think all of us have some stories.
Oh, absolutely. Shingai?
I mean, that just reminded me of one of my old students when I was teaching high school, who was a brown Latino kid from the Bronx, who was adopted by a white family and went to like a lot of white private schools. And there was this one essay assignment that I gave them where he wrote one of the most insightful things that I've read about a feeling of hypervisibility and invisibility simultaneously in those spaces, because he's being looked at without being seen. And there's also like performativity happening. So yeah, that experience, it's so deep.
Love that. Okay. I think I'm going to throw out one more subsection for us to talk about for this episode. And it was one I was actually excited about because one, I think it's probably a little too specific in that he says, give them a default personality trait. But the only examples he gives, let me read the first part. He says, and I think it's interesting the way he phrases it, give them a default personality trait. He says, characters grow and change throughout a story, and their moods can fluctuate wildly, even within each scene. But whether they're happy or sad as regressed or enlightened, they'll still have some aspects of their personalities that never change. He says you can certainly see this in the Marvel movies. All of his examples are from the Marvel movies. And then he just goes to the next section. I find this fascinating. I'm just going to do with the Iron Man one really quick. He says Tony in Iron Man completely changed his beliefs. He starts off saying to a reporter, my old man had a philosophy, peace means having a bigger stick than the other guy. By the end, he's had a big turnaround. He says his love interest, he says to Pepper, I'm going to find my weapons and destroy them. I'm not crazy, Pepper. I just finally know what I have to do. I know in my heart that it's right. Nevertheless, his default personality trait never changes. When he's a self-serving arms dealer, he acts like a cocky asshole. When he completely abandons arms dealing to become a heroic crusader, he still acts like a cocky asshole. And he goes on, he's got a Thor example and some other ones. How do you guys feel about this as part of this section? Give them a default personality trait. It feels to me that it's a very static way of looking at a character. But I don't know. Is an asshole always an asshole? Go ahead, Sameem.
Oh, sorry. I should give somebody else a chance to.
No, you're fine.
answer.
Go on.
I mean, I feel like I'm probably a broken record here. Like, I think this is, again, a really useful device if there's a specific thing that you're trying to do. But if you do it for every character, and if you do it the way that we see it in every single Marvel movie, it's really boring. It's like, yeah, I know you're going to get like, you're setting this up very quickly because you have to do a lot in a short amount of time. I appreciate it, but I don't want to see this over and over again. But you keep showing it to me over and over again. And so, yeah, there's moments, there's stories, there's times where you're going to want to use it, and it's a useful thing to know how to do, I think. But it's not the only way to show a character. Not all people are like this. And it's not the only interesting thing you can do.
And I wonder if it's medium specific, but I mean, I'm not that deep into the Iron Man comics, but I feel like this static personality trait with all of those comics, all those years, I can't imagine that Tony Stark never changes that part of his personality. I don't know. That's just me. I
can comment actually on that.
Please do.
He does, depending on who's writing him and what runs have been really popular. So, for example, what wasn't done in the Marvel movies, but was a very poignant and changing who Tony Stark was his battle with alcoholism and how much it affected his relationships and his view on life, and then him getting sober. That fundamentally changed it. So I think it's like Tony is always really cocky in a way, like that is his bravado. But as the comic started writing, and more so than not, especially in the last 15 years, this sense of kindness and leadership comes out most important, and his worry of the world. He's cocky when he needs to be cocky with certain characters, when he knows that is what's needed at the moment. But when it comes to his peers and when it comes to people he's helping, that cockiness goes away. Right? Another thing I would like to add, I'm very interested to see how they're going to do X-Men, because I think X-Men is probably the only comic, when it's written well, which there's been hits or misses, but Chris Claremont wrote it for 17 years. You saw the most beautiful change in all of the characters. And there's flaws with some of the stuff he's done, but if we take like Storm had so many levels from the get-go. She lost her parents at a young age. She was a thief in Cairo, and she was also worshipped as a goddess. But she also was deeply afraid because of her childhood trauma. She was very claustrophobic, right? And that carried her and was like a signature part of her personality for a long time. And then what Chris did is he started writing her about confronting her fears, about her getting over that, and then started adding different other things to that character. So I think it's important, of course, when you're starting a character, to have some of these default things that will always affect them, but allow them to change. That's what makes it so interesting. I think what we're seeing in the Marvel movies, well, I can actually speak to this for a fact. You're seeing other producers from Disney interjecting their opinions on what they think the people want to see.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think the level of depth that we could have with some of the characters isn't happening because we have producers who don't understand story and who actually don't understand those characters and interject. And I'm going to give you one more Marvel example. There was this Captain America comic called Red, White, and Blue, where the super soldier serum was actually used on a black man. And we see him in the new Captain America movie. Mm-hmm. But let me just tell you, the comic books go actually deeper. And it is a big critique on how black people are treated in this country and how they were completely deposed. Like, they were like completely disposable. And the movie could have done that, but because we had a bunch of people who were being producers, it wasn't allowed to be that. So I just want to come in the defense of comics, because comics can be just as deep as books and we can really see it. But when it comes to Hollywood and movies, it's just like you have these people who are all about money, 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 and thinking that's what people want, and you can't have an opinion.
But I think that's why I was asking that question, because he's framing it in the most, he goes on to talk about Steve Rogers, Doctor Strange, and Thor in the context of the Marvel movies. But as writers of larger works, right? That's why I wanted to throw it at you guys. I mean, sure, these movies might run a little bit, but you can write like The Expanse is however many novels, right? I can't imagine that one character trait of that one character sticks with them the entire time. Otherwise, what are we doing, right?
Well, I also think, what about and Shingai, and I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say this real quick. Like, there's some things that are just so core values of a character.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's something that could be consistent, right? Cockiness is not a core value.
Right.
A core value of protecting people, that's a core value, right? And that's when, if you're writing archetypes like superheroes and everything, those are the things that should be carried with that, because there's core values. Everything else should be changing.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm, like about my read of The Expanse now that I've read or watched the show, is they do capture Holden's core values pretty well, right? He stays very true to what he believes is right and doesn't really sway from that. But that doesn't mean he doesn't fold, adapt, and morph a little bit along the way. But that core of what he believes is right and wrong it stays pretty true, at least so far in the book. Shingai, you've been waiting. Sorry.
That's okay. You've actually given me more to think about. So the point that I was going to make originally is that I think for me, it's interesting when a character is presented with a steady value or attribute or whatever, when the author knows that later on they're going to move the character away from it, like they're going to contradict it, or the character is going to contradict their own steady thing. That for me is really fucking interesting, because that's human, like we're so full of contradictions. And it's then Will started talking about Tony Stark's character. And I was also thinking about how you can use that as a tool for exploring how we change. Like, grief changes us ultimately. Yeah. And whatever it is that is bringing such huge grief, like whether it's like a battle with alcoholism or whatever else, you start seeing your contradictions more clearly, and they become more visible to the reader. Yeah.
Love that. Jenna?
Yeah, I'm also thinking, and following what you're saying, Shingai, you've got me thinking too about the ways that sometimes having to face that those core values are harming other people is really important to a character. When you think you have a core value that is useful or good in the world, and then being met with like the effects of that on other people and what that means for how you understand yourself as a person. I'm now slipping into me language rather than character language. Oh, do I write autofiction sometimes? Oops.
I was doing that too. I was like, me, the character, we're the same.
All right. So does anybody have anything else on this particular topic? Because I think I'm going to leave it here, and not necessarily going to throw any homework at the listeners here, but I am encouraging people, though. I do want to throw something out at the listeners in between these episodes. Take a look at some of this stuff and throw it in the Discord. I know I said this in the last episode, but it was kind of nice to see that conversation kind of continue and see what people think of some of the topics we touched on. We're going to be finishing this section for sure next time. There's many subsections that I think will be really interesting. We'll get into backstories and stuff like that. So until next time. And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.